When his stepmother kicked him out on his 18th birthday, she told him he'd inherited nothing but a worthless, debt-ridden auto shop. But what he found inside would change not only his life, but the lives of strangers he'd never met. If you've ever been told you're not worth much, or been handed a legacy that felt more like a curse than a gift, stick around. This story is for you. And if it hits home, hit that subscribe button, because we're building a community here for people who know what it's like to start over. The cardboard box was surprisingly light. That was the first thing I noticed. For something that was supposed to contain my entire inheritance, my whole future, it felt like it was full of nothing but cold air. My stepmother, Sharon, held it out with two perfectly manicured hands, her arms stiff, as if it were contaminated. The front porch light cast a sickly yellow glow on the fresh snow that had started to fall, turning the world outside her perfect suburban home into a blurry, unforgiving landscape. It was my 18th birthday. "This is it, Leo," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as the December air. "Everything your grandfather left you, the keys, the deed, and the lawyer's contact information. I suggest you call him immediately. There are complications." I didn't reach for the box. My hands were shoved deep in the pockets of my thin jacket, the only one I owned. My knuckles were pressed against the worn denim, trying to find some warmth that wasn't there. 2 years. 2 years I had lived in this house after my dad died. 2 years of being a ghost in the hallways, a temporary problem with a definite expiration date. That date was today. She sighed, a puff of white vapor that vanished almost instantly. Theatrical patience. "Leo, take the box. The taxi is waiting." "I'm not paying for its meter to run all night." I finally looked at her. Not at her eyes, which were a flat, indifferent blue, but at the hard line of her mouth. She wasn't angry. She wasn't sad. She was finished. A project completed. A task checked off a list. The stray cat she'd been forced to feed had finally grown old enough to be dumped back in the alley. I took the box. The cardboard was cold against my fingers, slightly damp from the falling snow. "What kind of complications?" I asked, my own voice sounding foreign and small. "The property has a lien against it, a significant one. From what the lawyer, Mr. Davies, tells me, your grandfather was a very irresponsible man. He racked up debts with a local development company. You can either sign the property over to them to clear the debt, for which they'll give you a nominal fee, or you can assume the debt yourself. Given that you have nothing, the choice seems rather obvious." She gave a slight shrug, a gesture of finality. "It's a worthless old garage in the middle of nowhere, Leo. Take the $1,000 they're offering and start your life." $1,000 to sign away the only thing a man I barely remembered had left me. The garage was in a place called Northwood, a town I'd only ever seen on a map, a tiny dot hundreds of miles north, buried in the mountains. My grandfather, my dad's dad, had died when I was 6. I had vague, faded memories of him. The smell of grease and coffee, the low rumble of his voice, a calloused hand resting on my shoulder. He and my dad had been estranged for years before that. My dad never talked about him, and now they were both gone. "The taxi," Sharon repeated, already turning back toward the warmth of her house. The light from the living room spilled out, illuminating the perfect, sterile space I was being ejected from. I didn't say goodbye. There was no one to say goodbye to. I turned and walked down the shoveled path, the box held tight against my chest. Each step felt heavy, sinking into the fresh powder. The taxi was an old, rattling sedan, its engine a low grumble in the quiet street. The driver, a man with tired eyes, didn't say a word as I got in and placed the box on the seat beside me. "Where to?" he asked, his gaze meeting mine in the rearview mirror. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Where to? I had $112 in my wallet, a backpack with a few changes of clothes, and a box containing a worthless inheritance. The bus station, I finally managed to say. The downtown one. The car pulled away from the curb, and I didn't look back. I watched the perfect houses with their festive lights slide by, each one a little world of warmth and belonging that wasn't mine. I felt a strange numbness creep over me, a protective shell. It was better than the anger, better than the grief. It was just empty. The box on the seat next to me was the epicenter of that emptiness. A legacy of debt from a man I couldn't remember, delivered by a woman who couldn't wait to forget me. The bus station was a hollow, echoing place, smelling of disinfectant and despair. I bought a one-way ticket to a town called White Creek, the closest stop to Northwood. It would be a 16-hour ride. I found a hard plastic chair in a deserted corner and finally, carefully, opened the box. Inside, just as she'd said, was a large manila envelope, a set of old-fashioned keys on a simple metal ring, and nothing else. The keys were heavy, made of real steel, not the cheap alloys they use today. One was large and ornate, like a key to a castle gate. Another was a smaller, standard door key. A third was tiny, for a padlock or a cash box. They felt important. They felt real. I opened the envelope. It contained a single folded letter on thick, cream-colored paper. It was from the law office of Marcus Davies, attorney at law. The letter was brief and formal. It confirmed my inheritance of the property at 141 River Road, Northwood, upon my 18th birthday. It named the property as Miller & Son Automotive, and it confirmed the lien held by something called the Ridgeback Development Corporation for the sum of $85,000. My stomach clenched. $85,000. Sharon had made it sound like a nuisance. This was a crater. The letter ended with the same two options she had presented. Option A, sign the enclosed transfer of deed in lieu of foreclosure. Ridgeback would forgive the debt and pay me a $1,000 settlement. A pen was clipped to the document. I just had to sign my name, mail it in the pre-addressed envelope, and my inheritance would be reduced to a check. Option B, assume full ownership of the property and full responsibility for the attached lien. Legal proceedings would begin in 30 days. I stared at the signature line. It was so simple. Just a few strokes of a pen and I could have $1,000. It wasn't much, but it was more than I had. It was a bus ticket somewhere warmer, a few weeks in a cheap motel, a chance to figure things out. It was the sensible choice, the only choice. But I couldn't do it. Something in me, a stubborn, foolish piece of my father, or maybe my grandfather, refused. This garage, it was the only thing I had that was mine. It was a link to a past I didn't know, a family I'd lost. Selling it without ever seeing it felt like a betrayal. It felt like agreeing with Sharon that it was worthless, that I was worthless. The bus arrived with a hiss of air brakes, its headlights cutting through the swirling snow. I stuffed the papers back into the box, picked it up, and walked out into the cold. My bus was boarding. I was heading north. I was heading toward a debt I couldn't possibly pay, toward a building that was probably collapsing, in a town I'd never seen. For the first time all night, I felt something other than numb. It was a tiny, flickering ember in the vast coldness. It felt a lot like fear, but there was something else mixed in with it too. Something that might have been hope. The journey north was a blur of gray slush and skeletal trees against a white sky. I slept in fits, my head pressed against the vibrating window, the cold seeping through the glass. The landscape grew wilder, the towns smaller and farther apart. The other passengers were a collection of weary travelers, each lost in their own world. No one spoke to me. I was just another anonymous face, heading somewhere or running from something. I kept the box on my lap the entire time, my hands resting on it, as if I could absorb some meaning from it through the cardboard. When the bus finally pulled into White Creek, it was late afternoon the next day. The town was little more than a gas station, a diner, and a small general store huddled together against the encroaching forest. The air was so cold it felt sharp in my lungs. The snow was deeper here, piled in massive banks along the single-plowed road. The bus driver told me Northwood was another 15 miles up a county road, and no buses went that way. "You might get a ride from someone at the diner," he said, pointing a thumb toward a low building with a neon sign that flickered, "Eat." "Or you can call a cab from town, but it'll cost you." I thanked him and stepped off the bus, the box tucked under my arm. The world seemed unnaturally quiet, the sound muffled by the thick blanket of snow. I had less than $60 left. A cab was out of the question. My only option was to walk into that diner and hope for a miracle. The diner was warm and smelled of fried bacon and coffee. A few locals sat at the counter, their faces weathered and tired. They all looked up when I entered, the little bell over the door announcing my arrival. I suddenly felt very out of place, with my city jacket and my cardboard box. I took a seat at the end of the counter, trying to look like I belonged there. A woman with a kind, wrinkled face and hair the color of steel wool came over with a coffee pot. "You look half frozen, hun. Coffee?" I nodded gratefully. "Please. And I need to get to Northwood. The bus driver said someone from here might be heading that way." She poured the dark liquid into a thick ceramic mug. "Northwood? Not much up there this time of year. Just old man Miller's place, and he's been gone for years." She paused, looking at me more closely. You're not family, are you? You've got his eyes." My heart skipped a beat. "He was my grandfather. I'm Leo." Her face softened instantly. "Well, I'll be. I'm Mary. I knew your grandpa, Hank. He was a good man. A little strange, maybe, but a good man. Always paid his tab. Always helped a fella out." She topped off my coffee. "My husband, Joe, is just finishing his shift at the lumber yard. He drives right past the old garage on his way home. He can give you a lift." An hour later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a beat-up pickup truck, the heater blasting, rattling its way up a winding mountain road. Joe was a man of few words, but his presence was calming. He pointed out landmarks hidden under the snow as we drove. "That there's the old quarry," he'd say, gesturing toward a white expanse. "And that's the ridge where the big fire was, back in 2008. He told me a little about my grandfather. How he kept to himself mostly, but how anyone with car trouble between White Creek and the Canadian border knew that Hank Miller's garage was the one place you could count on, day or night, rain or snow." "Heard some city company bought up his debt," Joe said, his eyes on the road. "Been trying to get that land for a while. It's right on the river, prime spot for one of them fancy lodges." So it was true. The developer wasn't just a name on a paper. They were known. They were real. The feeling of dread returned, cold and heavy in my gut. Finally, Joe slowed the truck and pointed. "There she is. Miller and Son." I looked out the window and saw it for the first time. It was set back from the road, a long, low building with a peaked roof, half buried in snow. The sign was faded, the letters peeling, but still legible under a crust of ice. It wasn't a ruin. It looked sturdy, solid, like it had been built to withstand winters exactly like this one. Behind it, through the thick fir trees, I could just make out the glint of a frozen river. Joe pulled into the unplowed driveway. "You got keys to get in?" I held up the ring. "I think so." "All right." "Well, you need anything, you come find us at the diner. It's a small town, Leo. People look out for each other up here." He hesitated for a moment. "Your grandfather, he was one of the good ones. Don't let anyone tell you different." I thanked him, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I got out of the truck, grabbed my backpack and the box, and watched as his taillights disappeared down the road, leaving me alone in the vast, silent wilderness. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind in the pines and the frantic beating of my own heart. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the building. Miller and Son. My dad's name would have been the Son, a place he'd left behind, a place I'd just arrived. The snow was almost up to my knees as I waded toward the front door. It was a smaller door set into one of the large, sliding garage bays. The lock was old and stiff, covered in a thin layer of ice. I tried the smaller of the two main keys. It slid in, but wouldn't turn. I tried the other one, the larger, more ornate key. It fit perfectly. With a grunt of effort, I turned it. There was a loud, satisfying clunk as the old lock disengaged. I pushed the door open and was hit by a wave of cold, still air. It smelled of old oil, cold metal, and dust. For a moment, I just stood on the threshold, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. The only light came from the grimy windows, casting long, pale rectangles across the concrete floor. The space was enormous, much bigger than it looked from the outside. Two vehicle lifts stood like silent, skeletal giants in the center. Workbenches lined the walls, covered in the ghostly shapes of tools under a thick blanket of dust. Everything was neat, orderly, but unused. It was a place that had been left in a hurry, but not in a mess. It was a place waiting for someone to return. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, shutting out the wind. The silence in here was different. It was heavier. It was the silence of memory. I ran a hand along a cold metal workbench, my fingers leaving a trail in the dust. I saw a vintage calendar on the wall, flipped to July, 12 years ago. The month my father died. A shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I needed to find a light switch, a breaker box, something. I fumbled along the wall near the door, my fingers searching for a switch. I found one and flipped it. Nothing. Of course, the power had likely been shut off for years. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight, its bright, narrow beam cutting a sharp path through the darkness. The beam landed on a door in the back corner, marked Office. I walked toward it, my boots echoing in the cavernous space. The doorknob was locked. I tried the keys from the ring. None of them fit. I felt a surge of frustration. Of course it would be locked. Why would any of this be easy? I rattled the knob again, pointlessly. Then I remembered the third key on the ring, the tiny one. I had assumed it was for a padlock. I looked closer at the doorknob. There was a tiny, secondary keyhole right in the center of the knob itself, a type of lock I'd never seen before. With a trembling hand, I inserted the small key. It slid in smoothly. I turned it, and there was a faint click. I turned the main knob, and the door swung open. The office was small, just a simple room with a metal desk, a filing cabinet, and a single wooden chair. But unlike the main garage, it was almost perfectly preserved, free of the thickest dust, as if the sealed door had protected it. On the desk sat an old rotary phone and a metal lamp. In the center of the desk blotter was a single, sealed envelope, identical to the one Mr. Davies had sent me. My name, Leo, was written on the front in a strong, slightly slanted script. My breath caught in my throat. This was from him. This was from my grandfather. I sat down in the cold, stiff chair, my fingers tracing the letters of my name. The box from Sharon had contained my inheritance. But this felt like my legacy. After a moment of hesitation, I picked it up. The paper was thick and heavy. I carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The letter began, "My dear Leo." I had to stop and take a deep breath. No one had called me that in years. To Sharon, I was Leo. To the kids at school, I was Miller. To my dad, I had been Leo. The words on the page blurred for a second. I blinked, cleared my vision, and started again. My dear Leo, if you are reading this, then it means I am gone and you have come home. I am sorry that I will not be there to welcome you. I am sorry for the years of silence between your father and me. Pride is a terrible thing, and it cost me my son. I pray it will not cost me my grandson as well. I know you have been told this place is worthless. I know you have been told it is burdened with debt. I need you to listen to me very carefully now. Those are lies, told by men who want to steal what is ours. There is no debt. There is only this garage, this land, and the work that we do here. I have left you a choice, the same choice your father was never ready to make. You will find everything you need to know, but you must look for it. Things are not always what they seem in this place. The most valuable things are often hidden. Start here, in this room. Look where the oil doesn't stain. The letter ended there. No signature, just those cryptic last words. Look where the oil doesn't stain. I read the letter 3 more times. The words resonated in the silent, cold room. A choice. The same choice my father couldn't make. What did it mean? And what was this about the debt being a lie? Was it possible? Could an $85,000 lien just be fake? It seemed impossible. People couldn't just invent debt, could they? I stood up and scanned the small office with my phone's flashlight. The floor was clean concrete, just like the main bay, where the oil doesn't stain. It didn't make any sense. There was no oil in here. I walked back out into the main garage, the letter clutched in my hand. My flashlight beam danced across the floor. It was a sea of dark patches, decades of spills and drips, a map of countless repairs. The concrete was soaked in history. How was I supposed to find one place that was clean? I started a systematic search, walking the perimeter, shining the light under every workbench, behind every stack of old tires. It was hopeless. The stains were everywhere. I felt a familiar wave of despair wash over me. This was a wild goose chase, a cruel joke left by a lonely old man. Sharon was right. I should have signed the paper, taken the $1,000, and run. I was about to give up, to huddle in the office and wait for morning, when my light caught something. Underneath the main workbench on the far wall, the one piled highest with old engine parts and greasy rags, there was a section of floor that looked different. It wasn't clean, not exactly. It was covered in the same gray dust as everything else. But it lacked the deep, black saturation of the concrete around it. It was a lighter shade of gray. My heart started to pound again. I knelt down, wiping away the dust with the sleeve of my jacket. It was a perfect 4-foot square of pale, unstained concrete. I ran my hands over it. It felt smooth, just like the rest of the floor. But as my fingers explored the edges of the square, they found it. A hairline crack. A seam that wasn't supposed to be there. It was a trapdoor, cut so perfectly into the floor that it was nearly invisible. There was no handle, no ring to pull. I pushed on one edge. It didn't budge. I pushed on the other. Nothing. I felt along the seam again, more carefully this time. Near one corner, my finger dipped into a tiny, almost imperceptible indentation. It was a small hole, just big enough for a fingertip. I hooked my finger inside and pulled. The slab of concrete was incredibly heavy, but it lifted. It moved on a hidden, counterweighted hinge with a quiet, well-oiled groan. As I lifted it up and leaned it against the workbench, it revealed a dark, square hole in the floor. A hidden cellar. The air that rose from it was dry and cool, with no hint of mustiness. My phone's light cut into the darkness, revealing a short wooden ladder leading down. I hesitated for only a second. I had come this far. I had to know what was down there. I climbed down the ladder, my boots thudding softly on a wooden floor. The space was small, a 10 by 10 room, its walls lined with rough-hewn wooden shelves. And on the shelves were metal boxes, dozens of them. Old military-style ammunition cans, all painted black, each with a small, stenciled label on the front. But in the center of the room, on a small, sturdy table, sat a single, larger footlocker. It wasn't locked. I walked over to it, my legs feeling unsteady. This was it. This was the heart of the mystery. I reached out and lifted the heavy lid. I think I'd expected gold bars or something from a movie, but the reality was both more mundane and infinitely more shocking. The footlocker was filled to the brim with cash. Bundles of 20s, 50s, and 100s, all neatly wrapped in paper bands. I reached in and picked up a stack. It felt solid, real. I had never seen so much money in my life. It had to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Beneath the top layer of cash was a thick, leather-bound ledger and another stack of sealed envelopes, all tied together with a simple piece of twine. I picked up the ledger and opened it. The pages were filled with the same strong handwriting from the letter. But these weren't financial records for a garage. They were logs. Each entry had a date, a first name, a make and model of a car, and a destination. January 12th, Maria. 1998 Toyota Camry. Repaired faulty alternator, replaced 2 tires. Destination, Portland, Oregon. February 3rd, David and Son. 2001 Ford Ranger. Fixed cracked radiator hose, new battery. Destination, Denver, Colorado. Next to each entry was a number, not a dollar amount, something else. A note. Fleeing ex-husband. Gave her a full tank and $1,500 for food and lodging. Lost their farm. He found work with a cousin. Gave them $2,000 to make it there. I sank down onto the floor, the open ledger in my lap. I flipped through page after page, year after year. It was a secret history. My grandfather wasn't just a mechanic. This garage wasn't just a garage. It was a pit stop. It was a sanctuary. It was the first step on the road to a new life for people with nowhere else to turn. He was fixing their cars, filling their gas tanks, and giving them the money they needed to escape. The money in the footlocker. It wasn't a hoard. It was a fund, an operational budget for a one-man charity. My hands were shaking as I untied the twine around the letters. The top one was addressed to me. I opened it. Leo, it began. Now you know the truth of this place. This is the work. It started small, almost by accident. A woman showed up one night with a black eye and 2 kids in the back of a beat-up station wagon, a flat tire, and not a dime in her pocket. She was running from a man who'd put her in the hospital twice. I fixed her tire, gave her the cash I had in the register, and sent her on her way to her sisters in Seattle. I never heard from her again, but I never forgot her. After that, I started keeping my ears open. People talk. A bartender in White Creek, a deputy who felt helpless, a nurse at the clinic. They'd hear about someone in a bad way, and they'd send them to me. The word got around in certain circles. If you needed to disappear, Hank Miller could help you get your car right for the journey. The money came from everywhere and nowhere. Some of it was my own savings. Sometimes people I'd helped before would send money back once they got on their feet. A few friends knew what I was doing and would donate quietly. It always seemed like just when the fund was getting low, someone would show up or a check would arrive in the mail. The developer, Ridgeback, they're vultures. They've been trying to get this land for a decade. They prey on people with liens and tax problems. They tried to strong-arm me, but I owned this place outright. So they forged a debt. They created a paper trail of loans I never took using a shell corporation. Their lien is a ghost. It's fraud. But it's a ghost that can scare a young man who doesn't know any better into signing away his birthright. In one of the ammo cans, the one marked insurance, you will find all the proof you need. My original deed, tax records showing I was never in arrears, and sworn affidavits from 2 of their former employees who quit over their illegal practices. Everything your lawyer, Mr. Davies, will need to make them go away. He was my best friend, Leo. You can trust him with your life. His number is in the desk upstairs. Call him. Which brings me to the choice, the one your father couldn't make. When he was your age, I told him about the work. I asked him to be the son in Miller & Son. Not just as a mechanic, but as a partner. It scared him. He saw the risk, the illegality of it. He saw a life of hiding, of looking over his shoulder. He wanted a normal life, a safe life. He couldn't understand why I would risk everything for strangers. We argued. He left for the city and barely spoke to me again. I loved your father, Leo, but he was not built for this work. I have a feeling you are. So this is your inheritance, not the building, not the money, the choice. You can take the evidence and the money, disappear, live a comfortable life. No one would blame you. God knows you've earned it after the childhood you've had. Or you can stay. You can fight these vultures. You can keep this place for what it is, a beacon. You can be the man who helps the next car that rolls in here in the middle of the night, battered and desperate. The money is yours either way, but the work is only yours if you choose it. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. Your grandfather, Hank. I let the letter fall into my lap. The cold of the cellar didn't touch me. I was burning from the inside out. My whole life I had been powerless. A ward of the state, a burden to my stepmother, a piece of driftwood on the tide. I was given no choices. And here, in a hole in the ground under a forgotten garage, my grandfather had given me the most important choice of my life. Run and be safe, or stay and be significant. I sat there for what felt like hours, in the silent company of the cash and the ghosts in the ledger. I thought about my dad and the fear that must have driven him away. I understood it, but I also saw the quiet heroism of the man who stayed. A man who used his skill and his solitude to do profound and dangerous good. And that's when I stopped feeling like a victim. I stopped feeling like an orphan. I felt like a Miller. I'm going to pause the story here for a second. Because maybe you've had a moment like this in your own life. A moment where you were handed a choice that was so much bigger than you felt. A choice that could define who you were going to be. It's terrifying. It feels like standing on a cliff in the dark. If you've ever been there, or if you're there right now, I want you to know you're not alone. So many of us in this community have faced that cliff. Let me know in the comments about a time you had to make a choice that changed everything. Your story matters, and sharing it helps all of us feel a little less alone in the dark. Now let's get back to what happened in that cellar. I made my choice down there, in the cold and the dark. I folded the letter, placed it carefully back in the footlocker, and closed the lid. I left the money. I climbed the ladder, my movements sure and steady. I was no longer afraid. I was determined. Back in the office, I found the old rotary phone. I wasn't even sure if it would work. I found the number from Mr. Davies in the desk drawer, written on the back of a business card. I picked up the heavy receiver and was shocked to hear a dial tone. The line was still active. My grandfather had paid for it, years in advance, just in case. Just for me. My hands were steady as I dialed the number. It rang twice before a calm, professional voice answered. Davies. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice clear. "This is Leo Miller, Hank Miller's grandson." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, the voice warmed considerably. "Leo, my godson, I've been waiting for your call. Did you get to the garage safely?" "I'm here, and I found it. I found everything." I could hear the relief in his sigh. "Thank heavens. I was so worried that woman would pressure you into signing those papers before you had a chance. Hank was so afraid of that." "She tried," I said, "but I'm not signing anything. My grandfather said you could help me fight them." "Fight them?" Mr. Davies chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Leo, with what your grandfather collected, we're not going to fight them. We're going to bury them. Ridgeback Development is a house of cards built on fraud and intimidation. Your grandfather's file is the storm that's going to knock it all down. Are you sure about this, son? Once we start this, there's no turning back." "I'm sure," I said, looking out the office window into the dark, cavernous space of the garage. "This place is my home now. I'm not letting them take it." "Good lad," he said, his voice full of pride. "Your grandfather would be... well, he always knew you had it in you. He used to get letters from your dad before he passed. He knew what kind of young man you were becoming. Resilient, strong. That's why he left it all to you." Hearing that this stranger, this man I couldn't remember, had believed in me all along, it cracked open something inside me. All the grief and anger and loneliness of the past 2 years came pouring out. I sat there in the dark, holding that old phone to my ear, and I cried. I cried for my dad, for the grandfather I never got to know, and for the lost, scared kid I had been just yesterday. Mr. Davies stayed on the line, silent, letting me have my moment. He didn't offer platitudes or tell me to be strong. He just waited. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in years. When I finally regained my composure, we made a plan. He would file an injunction first thing in the morning to halt any action from Ridgeback. I was to gather the evidence from the ammo can labeled insurance and meet him in White Creek the next day. He would drive up from the city. He also gave me instructions on how to find the main breaker and get the power and heat running. My grandfather, ever prepared, had a small generator wired to the essentials just in case of a winter storm. After the call, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I found the breaker box just where he said it would be. I flipped the main switch and a low hum filled the garage. A moment later, the overhead fluorescent lights flickered on one by one, bathing the entire space in a clean, bright light. It was no longer a tomb, it was a workshop. I went back to the office and turned on the electric baseboard heater. A wave of warmth began to push back against the biting cold. Then, I returned to the cellar. I found the insurance box and carried it upstairs. I didn't open it. That was for Mr. Davies. I trusted my grandfather, and I trusted his friend. For the rest of the night, I explored. I opened every toolbox, every cabinet. My grandfather had owned an incredible collection of tools, both old and new, all meticulously maintained. I found spare parts for almost any vehicle imaginable. I found manuals, diagnostic equipment, and welding gear. It was a mechanic's paradise. But more than that, I found traces of the people he'd helped. A child's drawing tucked inside a manual. A cheap paperback novel left on a shelf with the inscription, "Thank you, Hank, you saved us." A faded photograph of a smiling family next to a station wagon, postmarked from Arizona. Each discovery was a piece of the puzzle of the man my grandfather was. He wasn't just a mechanic, he was a liberator. He used wrenches and spark plugs as his tools of freedom. The next morning, I met Mr. Davies at the diner in White Creek. He was an older man, with sharp eyes and a gentle demeanor, that couldn't quite hide the mind of a shark. He looked at me, then at the ammo box I placed on the table between us, and he smiled. "Your grandfather would have liked this," he said. "He loved a good fight, especially when the other guy was a bully." We spent an hour going over the documents. The fraud was blatant, clumsy even. Ridgeback had assumed they were dealing with a reclusive old man whose affairs were not in order. They never imagined he would be meticulously documenting their every move. Mr. Davies was practically giddy. "This is a slam dunk, Leo," he said, tapping a forged signature on a loan document. "More than that, with these affidavits, we can open a criminal investigation. We're not just saving your garage, we're putting these crooks out of business." He also brought me a box of his own. It contained a heavy winter coat, insulated boots, gloves, and a thermos. "From Hank," he explained. "He bought this stuff for you years ago, asked me to hold on to it for when you came." I held the coat in my hands. It was another message from the past, another piece of proof that I had never been truly alone. I had been watched over, cared for, from a distance. In the weeks that followed, the legal battle was swift and brutal. Ridgeback Development crumbled the moment Mr. Davies presented our evidence. Their lawyers advised them to settle immediately. They dropped the lien, paid a substantial sum in damages for fraudulent claims and harassment, and issued a formal apology. The local paper ran a story about their predatory practices, and soon, other victims came forward. A class action lawsuit was formed. Their house of cards didn't just fall, it was incinerated. Sharon, my stepmother, had apparently been promised a kickback from the developer for getting me to sign the papers quickly. When the whole thing blew up, she was implicated. I received a frantic, angry call from her, which I let Mr. Davies handle. I never heard from her again. I didn't feel vindictive. I just felt detached. Her world of sterile houses and petty schemes seemed a million miles away from the life I was building. And I was building a life. I used a portion of the settlement money and the funds from the seller to bring the garage fully back to life. I had the heating system overhauled, the wiring updated, and the roof inspected. I bought a used but reliable truck for myself. I spent my days cleaning, organizing, and learning. I read my grandfather's repair manuals, watched instructional videos online, and tinkered with an old engine he had on a stand. The work was hard, but it was honest. Every bolt I tightened, every surface I cleaned, felt like an act of devotion. I was reclaiming the space, making it my own, but also honoring the man who had built it. The locals in Northwood started to notice. Joe, the man who'd given me a ride, stopped by one day. "Heard you sent those Ridgeback fellas packing," he said, a grin splitting his weathered face. "Your granddad would have been proud." He looked around at the clean, well-lit garage. "You planning on reopening?" "That's the plan," I said. "Good. We need a decent mechanic up here. The kid down in White Creek charges an arm and a leg." Soon, others started stopping by. Mary from the diner brought me a hot casserole one evening, refusing any payment. The mailman started leaving my packages inside the door so they wouldn't get buried in snow. I was no longer an outsider. I was becoming part of the town's quiet, steady rhythm. I was Hank Miller's grandson. I belonged here. One night, about 2 months after I'd arrived, it happened. I was closing up late when a pair of headlights swung into the driveway. A battered old sedan with a sputtering engine rolled to a stop. A young woman got out, clutching the strap of a baby carrier in the back seat. She looked terrified, her eyes wide in the glare of the garage lights. Are you open?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and I saw the first entry in my grandfather's ledger. I saw Maria. I saw the woman with the black eye. "I am," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Looks like you've got some car trouble. Pull it inside." Let's see what we can do." As she drove the car into the bay, I felt a sense of clarity so profound it was almost overwhelming. This was the choice. This was the work. My inheritance wasn't the money, or the tools, or the building. It was this moment. The chance to be a beacon in someone else's storm. I didn't just fix her car that night. I gave her the number for a women's shelter in Oregon that my grandfather had listed in his ledger as a trusted contact. I filled her gas tank. And before she left, I went down to the cellar and took out a thick envelope of cash from the footlocker. I pressed it into her hand. "For food and a safe place to stay when you get there," I told her. She started to cry, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down her face. I can't ever repay you." "You don't have to," I said, echoing the words I imagined my grandfather had said 100 times before. "Just get there safe. That's all the payment I need." I watched her drive away, her taillights disappearing into the snowy darkness until she was gone. I went back inside, turned off the main lights, and stood in the silent garage. The smell of oil and metal was no longer the smell of the past. It was the smell of my future. It was the smell of home. What I inherited from my grandfather wasn't worthless. It was priceless. It wasn't a burden of debt, but a legacy of purpose. He taught me, through his letters and his actions, that the value of a thing isn't what someone will pay for it. It's the good you can do with it. He taught me that a home isn't just a roof over your head. It's a place where you belong, a place from which you can offer shelter to others. And he taught me that the most important choices in life aren't about what's easy, but about who we decide to be. I'm still here, in Northwood. Miller & Son Automotive is open for business. Most days, I fix flat tires for loggers and change the oil in Mary's sedan. I'm just a small-town mechanic. But some nights, a car I don't recognize pulls in, its driver looking for more than just a repair. And on those nights, I get to be something more. I get to be my grandfather's grandson. So I want to leave you with this. If you've been made to feel like you're not worth much, or if the things you've been handed in life feel more like curses than blessings, I want you to look closer. Look for the hidden value. Look for the purpose that might be buried under all the dust and the debt. Sometimes the most worthless things are just waiting for the right person to see their true potential. You might be that person. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, please consider subscribing and becoming part of this community. Share your own stories in the comments below. What's a worthless thing you were given that turned out to be a gift? I'll be reading every one. Because every story of finding value in the unexpected helps light the way for someone else. Be safe out there and look out for each other.